Welcome to the archive for Sexology. Among many other things, we offer free online courses in sexual health in several languages. I am the author, Erwin Haberli. One of my courses deals with human sexual behavior, and one of its sections discusses the mutilation of female sex organs, as it is practiced especially in parts of Africa and the Near East. This is what I now want to talk about. Before I go into details, let me make two comments about the terms I use. First, I do not use the now very common expression female genital mutilation because, as I have explained in another video, I find the word genital or genitals inappropriate in this context and prefer the simpler and more suitable term sex organs. Second, the mutilation of female sex organs has sometimes also been called female circumcision, as if it were a relatively harmless procedure, like the circumcision of males. This, however, is totally and deliberately misleading. When a male is circumcised, the foreskin of his penis is removed and nothing more. This permanently exposes the tip of the penis, and that's all there is to it. It's a matter of custom and tradition, or a matter of aesthetics, or in some rare cases, a medical necessity. People have different opinions about it. Some are for it, others against it. But from the standpoint of sexual health, the removal of the penile foreskin, if properly performed, is not a big deal. In contrast, the mutilation of female sex organs in virtually all of its forms is a severe physical injury, followed by often lifelong serious health problems. Once you know more about the procedures involved, you will understand why. So much for the terms. Now about the practice itself. First, let's have a look at the female sex organs as they appear on the outside. Please take a very good look at the clitoris, which is usually the object of the mutilation I want to discuss. Well, actually, in this picture, the clitoris looks pretty insignificant. You really don't see very much, just its foreskin, called prepuce by doctors, and its tip, the glans. But what the picture shows you is only a very small part of the clitoris. It is not the whole organ. The larger part is not visible from the outside. Therefore, properly speaking, the clitoris is not an external sex organ. In order to understand its function, we will have to look at the entire clitoris. And here is another picture, a schematic drawing. As you can now see, most of the clitoris is inside the body, making it more of an internal sex organ. Only its tip, the glans of the clitoris, and its prepuce, or foreskin, are outside. That is external. Moreover, our picture makes clear that, taken as a whole, the clitoris is about as large as a penis, and it plays a similar role in the sexual response. The two clitoral legs you see here, together with the glans, consist of erectile tissue, meaning that they can fill with blood and thus enlarge during sexual excitement. This is also true of the two tissues you see on both sides of the urethra, the so-called vestibular bulbs or clitoral bulbs. They also consist of erectile tissue. Now, as the female sexual response reaches its climax in orgasm, the blood accumulated in the entire clitoral system is released back into the bloodstream and the tissue returns to its unexcited state. This, of course, corresponds exactly to the male sexual response. During excitement, the penis is also filled with blood and thus becomes erect. Then, after orgasm, the blood recedes and the penis loses the erection again. In short, just as the penis responds in the male, the clitoris responds in the female. Thus, our schematic drawing already gives you some idea of why the clitoris is important for a woman's sexual response and sexual pleasure. On the other hand, we also understand that, unlike the penis with its ejaculation of semen, the clitoris plays no role at all in reproduction. Unlike the other sex organs, the clitoris is therefore definitely not a reproductive organ. It is not a genital, that is to say, not an organ of generation. Instead, it is mostly a pleasure organ. This has long been understood, even in ancient times, and even by people who did not have an accurate understanding of the female sexual anatomy and physiology. For some traditional male-dominated societies, reproduction was and is the main concern, and they knew and know that the female sexual response with its accompanying pleasure is not necessary for this purpose. In other words, they knew and know that the clitoris is not a reproductive organ. Thus, in their opinion, the clitoris was and is an unnecessary organ that women can and should do without. Of course, when in the distant past such men thought of this unnecessary pleasure organ, they meant only what they could see, its glands and its foreskin. They did not know the true extent and shape of the clitoris as an internal organ. But in any case, they insisted that whatever they could see of it on the outside had to go. So they invented various drastic methods of cutting it, reducing it, or removing it altogether. Depending on historical and geographic circumstances, these methods eventually became firmly established as folk customs. And in some regions of the world today, these different ancient customs still preserve the different, often very cruel forms of mutilation. I will now try to describe some of these customs. And I must warn you in advance that some of what I'm going to tell and show you is very upsetting. So if you are tender-hearted, you may want to stop watching right now. Basically, we are dealing here with three forms of mutilation: very bad, worse, and worst. Clitoridectomy, excision, and infibulation. Here is a brief summary of what these scientific terms mean in practice. Clitoridectomy means the surgical removal of the clitoral glands. Excision, from the Latin cutting out, means a clitoridectomy plus the removal of all or part of the inner lips, the labia minora. Infibulation here means an excision plus the removal of all or parts of the outer lips, labia majora. The remaining edges of these lips are then sewn together, closing the vaginal opening. Only a small hole is left for passing urine and menstrual blood. These operations are usually performed without anesthesia by elderly women on very young girls. The ages of these girls vary according to local customs from infancy to early adolescence. In most cases, the age lies between 3 and 8. The instruments are often unsterilized knives or razor blades. I will now go into more detail about these 3 forms of mutilation. This is not easy for me because they are so cruel, and it may also be distressing for you to learn about them. I will show here only schematic drawings of the female external sex organs, which are collectively called the vulva. I will not show actual photos or live pictures. Even so, if you'd rather not watch what comes next, every sensible person will understand. First, clitoridectomy. The surgical excision of the clitoral glands, clitoridectomy, is much more than a mere circumcision. The clitoris as a whole extends into the interior of the body, but cutting off its most sensitive tip, the glands, and perhaps part of the clitoral body, seriously cripples the female sexual response. Some or even much of the response may remain because the rest of the clitoral system remains unaffected. But this is no excuse for the physical and psychological damage. Second, excision. When a clitoridectomy is combined with the partial or complete removal of the inner lips, the labia minora, one speaks of an excision. This type of surgery amounts to a partial vulvectomy, that is, the removal of large parts of the vulva. The highly sensitive inner lips play an important role in the female sexual response, and their absence cannot but impair this response. In short, this operation is an even more serious mutilation than a clitoridectomy alone. Before I now turn to the third and worst form of mutilation, I think I should give you a brief introduction. The word infibulation is derived from the Latin fibula, pin or clasp, and originally it referred to the ancient practice of putting a ring through the male or female's external sex organs. This was often done to prevent male and female slaves from having sexual intercourse. The classic infibulation. In ancient, but occasionally also in modern times, males as well as females were infibulated. That is, a ring was put through the external sex organs in order to prevent them from masturbating or having sexual intercourse. Here are examples for a male and a female. At the end of slavery, 19th century doctors sometimes recommended the infibulation of males as a health measure that would prevent them from masturbating. At the time, masturbation was falsely believed to be unhealthy. However, when we use the word infibulation today in the context of the sexual mutilation of females, we mean something entirely different. a radical and very dangerous operation. Third, infibulation. We are now looking at a very serious operation, a total valvectomy, sometimes also called pharaonic circumcision. After an excision, that is, after the removal of clitoral gland and inner lips, the outer lips are also partially or totally removed. The remaining edges of these lips are then sewn together, closing the vaginal opening. Only a small hole is left for passing urine and menstrual blood. Quite clearly, this is a very dangerous mutilation with far-reaching consequences for the girl's health. First of all, the operation itself is dangerous. It can even be fatal. And the wounds usually take several weeks to heal. As a rule, the girl's legs remain tied together during this time in order to facilitate the healing process. A removable sliver of wood is inserted into the remaining small opening to allow for the passage of urine and menstrual blood. Even so, there is a danger of continued bleeding and infection. Second, urination may be so painful that girls avoid drinking enough. On the other hand, they may also experience urinary incontinence. In addition, the girls may develop excessive scar tissue, abscesses or cysts. Moreover, the menstrual blood, instead of flowing out freely, may accumulate inside and eventually lead to infertility. Finally, if several girls are cut with the same unsterilized instruments, there is a danger of hepatitis and HIV/AIDS transmission. However, as we shall see, these are by no means the only problems. The radical form of infibulation described here can also become an obstacle to childbirth. Excessive vaginal scar tissue can hinder or even stop the baby's delivery, and thus, at crucial moments, deprive it of oxygen. This can kill the baby, and as a consequence of further complications, can even kill the mother. Of course, before an infibulated female can have sexual intercourse, become pregnant and give birth, the infibulation has to be undone. Defibrillation. The procedure of undoing an infibulation is known as defibrillation, and it is usually performed on the wedding night. The parts of the vulva that had been sewn together are cut open again, and thus the vagina is once more made accessible. As a result, the female can now have sexual intercourse, become pregnant, and give birth. With that, she has done her duty and is ready for a second mutilation, the reinfibulation. Once the female has given birth, she is usually infibulated again in order to restore her body to its previous purity. This procedure is called reinfibulation. However, after several births, there may not be enough suitable tissue left to sew the vagina up again. A reinfibulation may be repeated after each birth, and in that case, a defibrillation will have to be repeated for each new desired pregnancy. While neither is as painful as the original mutilation, one can easily imagine what they mean for the female sexual experience. In addition to the physical problems already mentioned, Surgically mutilated females also suffer damage to their mental and sexual health. They may develop sleep and eating disorders and depressions. They may also find it hard to concentrate and may therefore lose interest in school. This, in turn, reduces their chances of improving their lot and leading self-determined lives. As for their sexual health, the consequences are different for different females. Some women continue to feel pain during vaginal sexual intercourse and therefore try to avoid it. Others are able to feel sexual pleasure. Some women cannot forget the experience of mutilation and therefore develop a negative attitude towards all sexual activity. Others are able to overcome their psychological trauma. Much depends on the circumstances of the individual case. In purely physical terms, if the vagina itself is still intact, the damage may be less serious than one might suspect. After all, as we have seen, the greater part of the clitoris lies inside the body and continues to function as a pleasure organ, even if its glans has been removed. Today, the practices of clitoridectomy, excision and infibulation continue mostly in regions where people are poor and illiterate and where women have a low social status. They lead their entire lives within the rigid patriarchal structure. Virginity is equated with purity, menstruating women are unclean, and arranged or forced marriages are common. Males dominate the religious, political, and legal systems. They set the rules at home and inherit the family's possessions. Under these conditions, girls are brought up to believe that they must be purified by means of some sexual mutilation, or they will have no chance to be married. Marriage, however, is their only way of finding social recognition and economic security. For this reason, women are often the strongest defenders of the practice. Suffering pain and injury seems preferable to becoming social outcasts. The mutilation of female sex organs is now found mainly in some parts of Africa and of the Arabic Peninsula. To a limited extent, the practice is also found in Pakistan, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. The following map identifies the most important countries and also shows where the main types of mutilation are being performed. You will find more information about this in my online course, including the names of the countries concerned. As you can see at first glance, the practice of excision, yellow, is much more common than that of infibulation, pink. You can also see that the practices are found in some, but by no means all, Muslim countries. Indeed, to the great majority of Muslims in the world, the practice is unknown. Very clearly, it is more a matter of regional culture than of religion. At any rate, the deliberate mutilation of female sex organs is still routinely performed in many countries today, and with a good conscience. Indeed, for the adults involved, it is a cause for celebration. Parents gratefully pay highly respected elderly women from the community, or even doctors and nurses, in order to subject their little daughters to this cruel and debilitating form of sexual child abuse. Why? Different cultures offer different answers to this question. For example, some say that the mutilation must be carried out because it is a traditional form of initiation into adulthood, a matter of hygiene, a mark of beauty, a symbol of chastity, a religious requirement, an economic necessity. Let me now briefly discuss these justifications. Tradition. Most women who defend the practice of sexual mutilation point to the role of tradition. Violating this tradition would make them social outcasts. The operation is an established part of a girl's preparation for her future as a wife and mother. A girl rejecting the operation would thereby also reject this role, an act that would amount to social suicide in some societies. In any case, the pressure to conform is felt not only by the girls themselves, but also by their parents. This pressure can be lifted only by helping the entire community to reform its traditions. Hygiene. Some arguments for the mutilation of female sex organs simply reveal the medical ignorance of their proponents. For example, in some communities, people believe that the operation increases fertility, or that the clitoral glands is an obstruction to the birth of a baby, and therefore must be removed well in advance. Others are convinced that the operation protects the girls from vaginal abscesses and many other health problems. Such ignorance can be overcome only by education. Beauty. In many communities, unmutilated female sex organs are considered ugly and disgusting, and the prevailing ideal of female beauty requires that they should be altered in some traditional way. Some of these communities have also persuaded themselves that an uncircumcised vulva has a bad odor, or that the operation will remove it. These deep-seated convictions are hard to change. Chastity. Male defenders of the practice have several arguments, some of them never openly admitted. First, the operation will keep women pure by reducing their sexual capacity. Female sexual desire is a sign of impurity and immorality. Allowing females too much sexual pleasure may very well make them infertile or lead them into a life of promiscuity and prostitution. Indeed, she could become impure by pleasuring herself. Masturbation must therefore be prevented by a timely clitoridectomy. Chastity, number 2. Many of the men who hold these views also believe that the various forms of mutilating female sex organs will add to their own enjoyment. Thus, they see the pleasure of marital intercourse as a zero-sum game. The husband can profit only at his wife's expense. His sexual pleasure increases because hers is diminished. Religion. Some Islamic communities believe that the mutilation of female sex organs is required by their religion. However, this is not true. In fact, the highest Islamic authority in Egypt, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, has reaffirmed that no religious precept in Islam justifies the practice. In any case, the majority of Muslims in the world do not follow it, while some non-Muslims do. Economics. The mutilation of female sex organs also has economic aspects. First, the operations constitute a source of income for those who perform them. Second, in some cultures, girls who have undergone an excision and fibrillation will command a higher bride price, that is, money paid to their parents by the family of the bridegroom. Third, in most of the countries concerned, females can find economic security only in marriage, but without the operation they have no chance of finding a husband. None of these arguments for continuing the mutilation holds up when you take a closer look. That is why many respected national and international bodies have issued official statements condemning the practice. Here are a few examples. The United Nations. In March 2007, the UN Commission of the State of Women urged the world to ban the mutilation of female sex organs and forced marriages. Some 6,000 women from governmental and grassroots groups passed the respective resolution. The first of these urges states to take all necessary measures to protect girls and women from female genital mutilation, including by enacting and enforcing legislation to prohibit this form of violence and to end impunity. UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, has also adopted a very clear position. It calls the mutilation of female sex organs a fundamental violation of the rights of girls. It is discriminatory and violates the rights to equal opportunities, health, freedom from violence, injury, abuse, torture, and cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment. UNICEF further emphasizes that all of these rights are already protected in international law. The World Medical Association. The World Medical Association is an international organization devoted to achieving the highest medical standards for all people in the world. It unequivocally condemns the practice of genital mutilation, including the circumcision of women and girls, and condemns the participation of physicians in such practices. So, what can be done about this? How should one go about ending these horrible customs? What are the practical steps one can take? One thing is certain. Little can be accomplished without the voluntary cooperation of the communities concerned. In many cases, great social changes have to be brought about, and these can occur only if everyone sees their advantages. A campaign to end the traditional mutilations must therefore combine legal reform with education and must be supported by religious authorities and other leaders in the community. I can show you here 3 examples of promising approaches. CARE International. This well-known organization fighting global poverty also tries to end the mutilation of female sex organs. In 2006, the president of CARE therefore asked the citizens of the world to sign a petition to stop it. However, at the same time, she also emphasized that ultimately this goal can be reached only through respectful community dialogue. Our approach includes educating key community leaders, religious leaders, and village elders, starting a community dialogue and holding public discussions, supporting individual change in families that abandon the practice. UNICEF. In the same spirit, UNICEF has published a practical guide on how to achieve the same goal. It's called Changing a Harmful Social Convention, Female Genital Mutilation Cutting. This guide also concentrates on community action. It proposes the creation of an enabling environment for change. It therefore emphasizes dialogue and non-judgmental discussions, alternative rites of passage or initiation ceremonies, alternative employment opportunities for the excisors, and working with migrant populations in industrialized countries. Finally, here is an important document issued in 2003 in Cairo. There, representatives from 28 African and Arab countries affected by the practice issued the Cairo Declaration for the Elimination of Female Genital Mutilation. It contains a statement from a highly respected Islamic authority, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, one of the oldest universities of the world and one of the greatest centers of Islamic learning. The Cairo Declaration. In 2003 in Cairo, representatives from 28 African and Arab countries affected by the practice issued the Cairo Declaration for the Elimination of Female Genital Mutilation. This document was important because it could not be attributed to uncomprehending Western agitators. Especially significant were the statements of the two most influential Islamic and Christian religious leaders in Egypt, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar and the representative of the Coptic Pope. Both reaffirmed that no religious precept, either in Islam or Christianity, justifies the practice. The Cairo Declaration created a new basis for the cooperation between local and international agents for change.